I never thought you would tell this secret to someone, and a simple family meeting would transform my life. My name is Helena. I am 42 years old, and until recently, I thought I had a perfectly normal life. I have been married to Roberto for 15 years. We have no children, and we both have successful careers. So our relationship has always been stable, maybe a little monotonous lately, but nothing that worried me too much. Or so I thought until that fateful night. It was a Saturday like any other. My sister Anna was organizing a family dinner at their house to celebrate her son's birthday. Oldest, my nephew Carlos, who had just turned 23 years old. Carlos was always a charming boy, intelligent and very mature for his age. Since he was little, we had a special relationship. I was his favorite aunt, and he was my spoiled nephew. I never had my own children, so in a way, Carlos filled that void in my life. The dinner went without a hitch. The food was delicious, the wine flowed, and there was no shortage of laughter. Roberto, my husband, as always, drank a little too much. Not that he was a rump. At family gatherings used to be a little out of control at the end of the night, when everyone started to say goodbye. I noticed that Roberto could barely stand Helena. I think I need help getting to the car, he whispered in my ear with a slurred voice and glassy eyes. I sighed resignedly. It wasn't the first time that I had to deal with this situation. I apologized to my sister and started to help Roberto to get up at that moment. Carlos approached us. Aunt Helena, do you need help? Asked with genuine concern. Thank you, dear. The truth is that yes, your uncle is a little unwell, I responded, grateful for the offer between the two of us. We managed to get Roberto out of the house and put him in the back seat of the car. Carlos offered to drive to our house, which was about 20 minutes away. I accepted without hesitation, as I had also had a little to drink, and I didn't feel completely confident behind the wheel during the journey. Carlos and I talked animatedly about his studies and his plans for the future. I was always proud of him and how he was putting his life on track in the back seat. Roberto was snoring softly. We got home, and again, we had to make a concerted effort to get Roberto out of the car and into the bedroom. We placed him carefully on the bed, and I took off his shoes. Carlos was waiting at the bedroom door as if he didn't want to invade our privacy. Thank you for your help, Carlos. I don't know. What would I have done without you? I said as we left the room and closed the door behind me. Auntie, you know you can always count on me, she replied with a smile that seemed strangely intense. We went to the kitchen. I needed a glass of water, and I imagined that Carlos would like to freshen up before going back to his parents' house. As we drank insolence, and noticed that Carlos looked nervous, as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare. You are fine, dearie. You seem a little tense, I asked, genuinely worried. Carlos took a long sip of water before answering. Aunt Helena, the truth is that there is something I like. The lady has a moment. Your serious tone alarmed me a little. Of course I have, Carlos. You know, you can't talk to me about anything. What's going on? He went through the hand in his hair, a gesture he made since he was a child when he was nervous. It's complicated. See, there is a woman. My heart was touched. My little Carlos was in love. Oh, Dirth, that's wonderful. Why are you son Irvas? She doesn't love him back. Carlos let out a bitter laugh. I would like it was that simple, Auntie. The problem is that she's older than me, a little older, and she's married. I felt like a bucket of cold water was falling on me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sweet and innocent Carlos in love by a married woman, dear me. This is a very delicate situation. Are you sure about your feelings? She felt there firmly. I've never been so sure about anything in my life, Auntie. I love her. I love her. Like I've never loved anyone, but Carlos, she's married. That's right. You can destroy a marriage, a family. I know, Auntie, believe me. I know I've been fighting these feelings for months, but I can't take it anymore. I need to tell her. I need her to know. I felt a pang of compassion for my nephew. I remembered how the feelings could be intense at this age, how everything seemed absolute. Carlos, I understand. Your feelings are strong, but you need to think about the consequences. What will happen if you tell her? Have you ever thought about how this will affect the whole family? Carlos was silent for a moment. Asif was working up the courage to do something. Then he raised his head and fixed his gaze on mine, with an intensity that made me shudder. Aunt Helena, the woman I'm in love with is you. The world stopped at that moment. I felt as if the ground at my feet was disappearing, and I was falling into a bottomless abyss that couldn't be true. I must have heard wrong. Carlos, what you're saying? I managed to stammer instinctively, backing away until my back hit the kitchen counter. He took a step towards me with his eyes full of an emotion that I didn't. I wanted to recognize you. I love you, Aunt Helena. I've loved you for as long as I can remember. At first I thought it was just admiration, the normal affection of a nephew for his favorite aunt. But as time went by, I realized that it was much more than that. You are the most beautiful woman, beautiful, intelligent, and wonderful that I've ever met. My thoughts were in a whirlwind. I couldn't process what I was hearing. It could only be a nightmare, a bad joke, but the intensity in Carlos's eyes told me he was serious. Carlos, no, you don't know what you are saying. This is wrong on so many levels. I am your aunt, for God's sake. I am married to your uncle. We are 30 years apart. This can't happen. I tried to make my voice sound steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. Carlos gave more a step towards me, closing the distance between us even more. I know it seems crazy, Auntie. Believe me, I tried to fight it. I've gone out with other girls. I've tried to forget you, but there's no point. My feelings for you are stronger than anything else about you. Hand reached up as if it wanted to touch my face but stopped halfway. I was paralyzed, unable to move or form a coherent thought. Carlos, please, you have to understand that this cannot happen. We're a family. I am your mother's age. I'm married to your uncle. What you feel is not love, it's a confusion of fantasy. But even as she said those words, a part of me began to doubt how I hadn't noticed before. The way Carlos looked at me, how I hadn't noticed his hugs lasted a little longer than normal. He always tried to be close to meet family gatherings. It's not a fantasy, Aunt. It's real as the fact that I'm here in front of you, opening my heart to you. I know you have fear that thinks it's wrong, but love can never be wrong. And what I feel for you is the purest and truest love I've ever felt. Your words shook me like a wave, awakening feelings. I thought I'd forgotten. I was suddenly painfully aware of how attractive Carlos had become. He was no longer the boy who used to sit in my knee. He was a strong young man with a look that could melt us. This can't be happening. I muttered more to myself than to him. Carlos, you need to go. Although now we will forget that this conversation happened, but he didn't take me. Instead, he took another step towards me, almost completely eliminating the space between us. I could feel the heat of his body, feel the smell of his cologne mixed with the smell of wine dinner. I can't leave, Aunt Helena, not without telling you everything I feel. Not without telling you that for me you are the most beautiful woman in the world, that every time I see you my heart races, that every night I dream about you. Your words were like a drug, clouding my judgment, making everything else seem insignificant. Part of me had to push him away, screaming for him to go away, so he would never come back. But another part of me, part that I didn't know existed, wanted to get closer, wanted to know what it would feel like of your lips against mine. Carlos, please, I begged, although I was no longer sure what I was begging for. And then it happened. Carlos closed the distance between us and kissed. Lips were soft, warm, and insistent. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to react. Then, to my horror and embarrassment, I found myself responding to the kiss. It was as if a dam had broken inside me. All the feelings that I had been repressing, all the passion that I had forgotten existed, overflowed in that kiss. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer to his body. He pressed himself against me, cornering me against the counter. I don't know how long that kiss lasted. It could have been seconds or an eternity. When we finally separated, we were both breathless. The reality of what had just happened hit like a train. Oh my, what have we done? I whispered, horrified. Carlos in turn seemed euphoric. His eyes shone with a mixture of love and desire that scared and excited me in equal parts. What we should have done a long time ago. Aunt Helena, be honest with our feelings? I shook my head to clear my thoughts. That's it, wrong, Carlos, very wrong. I don't know what happened to him, yet it can't happen again. I never tried to push him away, but it didn't move. Instead, he held my face with his hands, forcing me to look him in the eyes. Aunt Helena, I know you're scared. I know you think this is wrong, but what just happened, that you didn't feel that connection, that spark. I couldn't deny that kiss had awakened something in me that I thought that'd been dead for a long time, but that didn't change the fact that this was a colossal mistake. Carlos, please understand, I'm your aunt, I'm married, and this can't happen. And if it could, and if we could find a way, he insisted with his eyes full of hope and determination, and my eyes trying to find the strength to doth the right thing. When I opened them again, my voice was firmer. There is now a Carlos. That was a mistake, a terrible mistake. That should never have happened, and never again. You have to go. Emir, I saw the pain in his eyes, but I also saw that he understood that I wasn't going to change my mind, at least not tonight. Slowly, she took a step back, prison of her body. I'm leaving, Aunt Helena, but this isn't over yet. What I feel for you is real, and I know you felt something too. I won't give up of you so easily. With those words, she turned and left the kitchen. I heard the front door open and close, and then the sound of his car driving away. I fell to the ground, shaking. What had just happened? How did I have things to be so raw way, and worse to fall? On my part, I wish that Carlos hadn't left. I spent the rest of the night awake, tossing and turning on the sofa, unable to go back to the bed where Roberto slept. Oblivious to everything, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, guilt, shame, fear, but also, to my regret, a spark of excitement and desire that I could not ignore in the morning. When Roberto woke up with a heavy hangover, I told him an edited version of the previous night's events. I told him that Carlos had behaved inappropriately, insinuating himself but omitted kiss and my own actions. Roberto was furious, of course, and wanted to call my sister to tell her everything. I convinced him not to do that, arguing that it would only cause problems in the family and that Carlos was probably confused and regretful. The following days were torture every time. When the phone rang, my heart raced, fearing it was Carlos. Every time I went out onto the street, I looked around nervously, hoping to see him on every corner. But he didn't care. He didn't show up. I don't know if I was relieved or disappointed by that. Roberto, in turn, was more attentive than usual. I think my story about Carlos's behavior had alarmed him. He brought me flowers for no reason, invited me out to dinner, and even suggested that we take a holiday together. In other circumstances, I would have been very happy with this attention. Renewed, but this only served to increase my guilt. A week after the incident, I received a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk, please." See, my heart sank as I read the message. I knew I should ignore it, delete it, and move on with my life. But I couldn't. Instead, I found myself answering "Oak tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the park cafeteria." The next day was an agony of nerves and expectations. I dressed more carefully than usual, putting on light makeup and choosing a dress that I knew would suit me. I felt guilty, that's why, but I couldn't help it. I arrived at the cafeteria 10 minutes before the scheduled time. Carlos was already sitting there, in an isolated table, when he saw me. He stood up, and his eyes ran over my figure in a way that made me blush. "Aunt Helena," he said softly. When I approached, "Thank you for coming." You sat in front of him, aware of the tension that vibrated between us. "Carlos, this cannot happen again. What happened that night was real." He interrupted me. "It was the most real thing I have ever felt in my life." I sighed, closing my eyes for a moment. "Carlos, you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Everything you think you feel for me will pass. You'll find someone your age, someone you can have a future with." He shook his head, his eyes burning with determination. "I don't want anyone else, Aunt Helena. I want you, and I know you felt something that night too. You can't deny it." She couldn't deny it. It was true, but that didn't change anything. "Carlos, I'm your aunt. I'm married to your uncle. I'm your mother's age. This is wrong on so many levels. Love is never wrong," she insisted. Leaning forward, "I know there are obstacles, but we can overcome them together." His words went through me like an arrow. Part of me wanted to believe in him. I wanted to throw myself into his arms and forget everything else, but the rational part, my brain, knew that this was impossible. "Carlos, please, you need to understand this cannot happen. No matter how we feel, no matter what we want, the cost would be too high. They would destroy your family, your mother, your father. Have you ever thought about how this would affect them?" I saw the pain in his eyes, but I also saw that my words were reaching him. "But Aunt Helena, and as for our happiness, we don't deserve to be happy. The happiness built on the pain of others never lasts." "Carlos," I replied softly, "besides, have you really ever thought about what it would be like? We would have that hidingly and constantly. We would live in fear and guilt. This is not love, Carlos. This is a fantasy." He was silent for a long moment, processing my words. Finally, he spoke with a choked voice. "So what should I do? How can I just forget how I feel about you? My heart, if it broke a little when I saw with pain." I reached my hand across the table and took his. "It won't be easy. I know, but you're young, Carlos. You have your whole life ahead of you. With time, these feelings will disappear. If you will meet someone else, someone with whom I can have a real future." He squeezed my hand, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "I can't imagine loving someone the way I love you." "You will," I assured you, "and when that happens, you will understand why that couldn't happen." We stayed like that for a moment, holding hands in silence. Finally, Carlos slowly nodded his head. "I understand, Aunt Helena. I don't agree, but I understand. I promise. I promise. I'll try to move on." I felt a mixture of relief and a strange sense of loss. "Thank you, Carlos. I know it's not easy, but it's was the right thing to do." We separated with an awkward hug, both aware of the tension that still existed between us. As I watched him walk away, I felt a pang of regret. Was I doing the right thing, or was I letting something special slip out of fear and my social convention? Story is not over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks. Back to the story. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved to have done Asa right by putting an end to something that could have destroyed our family. On the other hand, I couldn't stop thinking about Carlos, the intensity of his feelings and the possibility of what could have happened. Robert noticed my change in mood and attributed it to the incident with Carlos that I had told him about. He was more affectionate and attentive than that. Never, which only served to increase my guilt. How could I think about betraying this man who loved me so much? Weeks passed, and little by little life returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Family gatherings became strange, and Carlos and I carefully avoided being alone or even making prolonged eye contact. I could feel the confused looks from my sister and brother-in-law, but no one dared to ask what was going on one night. Almost 2 months after our meeting at the coffee shop, I received another message from Carlos. "I'm sorry, Aunt Helena. You were right. I met someone. Thank you for everything." I read the message several times, feeling a mixture of emotions that I couldn't decipher. Relief, yes, that Carlos was moving on, but also a pang of jealousy and regret that I was ashamed of admit that night while I was awake next to Roberto. I reflected on everything that had happened. Had I done the right thing, or had I left the opportunity for true love hidden because of fear and social conventions? I had no answers. Clear everything what I knew was that for everyone's sake, I had to move on. I had to bury those confusing feelings and that forbidden attraction within me. Months passed and life continued. Carlos started bringing his new girlfriend to family gatherings. She was a lovely girl about his age, and I could see how happy she made him. I was genuinely happy for him, although a small part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if Roberto and I worked on our relationship? The shock of the incident with Carlos made us realize that we had fallen into a routine, and in complacency we started doing more things together, communicating better, rediscovering why we had fallen in love in the first place. And I learned a lot about myself. Throughout this process I learned that even after years of marriage, I could still feel passion and desire. I learned that love can take unexpected forms, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. I kept the secret of what had really happened that night in the kitchen. It was a burden I decided to carry alone to protect everyone involved, but I can't deny that, despite the guilt and shame, a part of me cherished the memory of that moment. A forbidden passion life is full of paths not taken and possibilities unexplored. I will always ask myself, what if? But at the end of the day, I'm in peace with my choices. I chose a stability over passion, family over desire, and although sometimes out of the night my mind wanders about what could have been, I know in my heart that I made the right choice. This experience has taught me that love can be complicated, confusing, and sometimes painful. But it also showed me the strength of commitment, the importance of family, and the power of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Now, years later, I can look back on that night in the kitchen with a mix of nostalgia and relief. It was a moment to madness, a flash of passion that lit up my life in unexpected ways, but like every intense flame, it was destined to be extinguished quickly. Carlos is now a happily married man with a beautiful family. I'm still with Robert. Our relationship is stronger than ever after we passed that test without him knowing, and although sometimes when our eyes meet in family unions, I can see a glimpse of what once was, we both know that it's part of the past. Life is full of turning points off our king paths. That night in the kitchen was one of those moments for me. I chose the more difficult path, the path of duty and responsibility, instead of the path of passion and desire. And although sometimes I wonder what the other path would have been like, I know in my heart that I made the right choice, because at the end of the day, love isn't just about passion and desire. It's about sacrificial commitment to do the right thing, even when it hurts. And sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. I keep this secret, this moment of madness and passion, like a hidden treasure deep in my heart, a reminder that life can surprise us, that we're never tooled to feel desire. And although I kept the secret, the emotion I felt in that day was worth it. Shame. It reminded me that I was alive, that I could still feel, that I could still burn, and that in itself is a precious gift. So if you ever find yourself at a similar crossroads, remember, love can take many forms, some unexpected, some forbidden, but in the end, what really matters is being true to yourself and your values, because these are the foundations on which we build our lives, our relationships, and our future. And who knows, maybe in another life, in another universe, Carlos and I will be together living this passion forbidden. But in this life, in this world, we choose the path of duty and responsibility. And event sometimes it is difficult. Sometimes it hurts. I know it right decision. And although I will never forget that night in the kitchen, that moment of forbidden passion, I know that I made the right decision, because at the end of the day, true love is not just about what we feel, but what we do with those feelings. And I chose love in its most mature and responsible form. I chose family, commitment, and although sometimes I feel ask, and if I know in my heart, I wouldn't change my decision. Thanks for listening. Consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks.